Hey, let's talk about JavaScript promises. Do you not understand them at all? Or maybe you understand them a little bit. Maybe you've seen them in some tutorials or something like that. But you still struggle to understand like when and where you might actually use them in your real job? Well, here's a quick example. Maybe it'll help a bit. So here we have version 1 of an API whose purpose is to, say, get scores for baseball games or something like that. And for version 1 of the API, the mechanism that retrieves the actual scores is hosted locally in this object I'm calling local service. So if we go ahead and run this, you can see it generates a quick report, generates 2 random numbers, and logs into the console. Now in version 2 of this API, one of the requirements is that the mechanism that retrieves the scoring is moving off of the local service and moving to some remote location, like a REST API or something like that. So for the purpose of this video, let's pretend like we can see the actual implementation of the remote getScore function. So we'll start off by simply renaming this to remote service, just for clarity. And getScore, like I mentioned, is now going to exist on like a REST API instead. So we're going to asynchronously return math.random instead. So instead of returning math.random, we'll return a new promise that ultimately resolves to a random number. So in this case, we'll wait like 1 second, something like that, and we'll resolve to math.random, and we'll wait like 1 second. Okay, so are we done? Can we just run this? What's going to happen? Let's run it. Oh, what's all this nonsense? Oh yeah, this thing returns a promise. Let's continue learning about JavaScript promises. A series where I'm going to be introducing and comparing the 2 different ways of invoking promises, namely the promise.then.catch syntax versus the async await syntax. Let's do it. We start by introducing this getPromise function, and all it does is return a new promise that is going to either resolve or reject based off what the value of the milliseconds argument is. If this value is less than 1 second, the promise will resolve after that amount of time. Otherwise, the promise will reject. Now that you know how this getPromise function works, I'm going to go ahead and just shrink it down here so we have a little bit more room. So now I've added this go function, which just has a little bit of logging. Let's go ahead and get a promise that is going to resolve after 500 milliseconds. So we'll start with the then catch syntax. So as you can see, a promise has a then callback, and the value that it resolves to will get passed to this callback. So let's go ahead and just log out milliseconds. And then we'll run it. Start, stop, 500. Well, that's kind of strange. What's going on here? Do note that execution does not stop at this point. So what's going to happen is start's going to log, we're going to kick off getPromise, then stop is going to log, and then after those 500 milliseconds, the then callback is going to fire, and that's why we see 500 here. Next, let's get a promise that rejects after 1.5 seconds. And if we don't make any other changes, this will actually end up throwing an unhandled exception. That's because then, with only a single argument here, will not do any error handling at all. So what we can normally do is just add a catch callback, catch the error, we'll go ahead and log out the error. Go ahead and run this. Notice that the same execution order behavior we saw with the resolved promise is with the rejected promise too. Now let's compare how we do this using async await. First, let's get rid of the then catch syntax that we used before, and we'll go back to using a promise that actually resolves. So instead of using .then, we can actually use await, which effectively will wait for the promise to resolve. But if we want to use await inside of a function, we need to explicitly mark the function as async. Now if we want to get the value that the promise resolves to, we can just set it directly like this. So in this case, const milliseconds equals await getPromise 500, and now we'll log out MS. Go ahead and run it. Hey, what happened here? It's much different. The 500 is between the start and the stop. This is what's cool about async await, is that this line here, await, actually pauses execution until the promise actually resolves or rejects. In this case, we're going to log out start, wait for get promise to resolve, then log out milliseconds, and then log out stop. That's one of the key differences between then catch and async await. Now for the case where a promise actually rejects, we're not going to get the value of the rejected promise by using this syntax. We actually need to wrap everything in a try-catch block. We'll go ahead and do that now. Let's go ahead and run it. Notice again that the execution actually paused and waited for the promise to get fulfilled. In this case, it was rejected after 1.5 seconds. That's why we see a log of start, followed by the rejected value, which was 1500, and then lastly, the stop. Thanks for watching.